that 9,140 youngsters had committed suicide because of not getting jobs. We've had many tamashas in the last 10 years. 15th of August 2022, the country was subject to this entire 75 years of independence. I was in the Sabarmati Mahila jail. Women who had served 14 years, 16 years, 18 years in prison for individual crimes, but the remission did not come. 14 convicts in the Bilkis Bano case had been given remission. I think that no individual is above the dangerous ideology that the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh itself on the horrors of Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's Nazism, but Indian form of fascism, even more dangerous. Is it the end of the show? Is it the end of the show? Is it the end of the road? Last 10 years, every time there's a visit by the Prime Minister to this state, the land of Periyar and Annadurai, go back Modi is what trends on social media. Finally, the North is learning from the South. And I would like to salute the leadership of the DMK here when they made that slogan in the election, 28 Paisa Pradhan Mantri. Dear friends, Vanakkam. First of all, I'd like to thank my very young friend here for such a generous introduction. I don't know whether it'll help me or not, but I'd also like to tell friends from the police and the IB that everything I'm going to say is constitutional and lawful, and this country is still a free country and a democracy, and we will exercise our right to have our own opinions and express them. Friends, on 15th of August 2022, when the country was subject to this entire tamasha, we've had many tamashas in the last 10 years, many tamashas enacted from the top of Amrit Mahotsav, 75 years of independence. I was in the Sabarmati Mahila jail. And that day, many of us got ready, the women got ready early because we wanted to have a flag hoisting. And we went to the jailer and we said, why is there no flag hoisting in the jail? And they said, there is no flag hoisting in the jail. There's only flag hoisting when the district collector comes. So we argued, we protested, but there was no hope. So we went back and started discussing things. And as the day progressed, 15th of August, there was a lot of agitation amongst some of the women prisoners. I could not understand because there were two kinds of prisoners. We had 5 barracks in which we were under trials, and one other side, there were 2 barracks where they were the convicted prisoners. And there was a lot of agitation in the convicted prisoners, and I wanted to know what was upsetting them. About 15 or 20 of them were crying and they were very upset and angry. Gujarati, so I can speak Gujarati, that's my mother tongue. So I sat and I asked them, I said, what is the problem? 21 of them had been waiting for remission for the last 5 years, 6 years, 4 years, 3 years. In Gujarat, there are only 4 days you can get remission. Either it is 26th January, 1st May, Gujarat Divas, Independence Day, 15th August, or Gandhi Jayanti, 2nd October. So they were hopeful that 75 years of independence, they had sent repeated requests to the secretary, law secretary, chief secretary. They had not got it. And these were women who had served 14 years, 16 years, 18 years in prison for individual crimes. But the remission did not come. 2 days later, we discovered in the jail, when the newspaper, because the newspaper comes a day or two late in jail, we discovered that 14 convicts in the Bilkis Bano case had been given remission. Friends, I cannot even tell you the kind of anger there was amongst these women. They almost said, we'll organize a protest. I was just watching and documenting it, watching them, writing down. But then the fear kicked in and the protest could not happen. Why is there fear in our prisons? Because the whole prison economy is well oiled by the state. These women are given a miserable 3,100 rupees for doing all the work, cooking, cleaning, gardening. And by that time, their families have not been able to sustain them. So they are dependent on that 3,000 rupees. So they thought that if we protest, then that money will go away. And therefore the protest went. Why am I mentioning this incident? Not only to mention that I was in Sabarmati Women's Jail. And there might be another case, my dear friend, but there are already about 11 cases against me. But it's because of the complete callousness of this regime. I can't even call it a government. It is a regime. And why is it a regime? Why is it a regime? Because it does not even have a semblance of democratic governance. It's not as if before 2014, our governments before that were ideal democratic governments. We were a democracy in the making. Our subaltern societies were resisting, protesting, and getting the state to become more democratic. We did not have proportional representation. We don't have it today. We do not have limits on electoral spending. That creates a problem. So there are many issues which remain unresolved even before 2014. But there was a possibility for struggle, except for those 1.5, 2 years during the emergency, when we also struggled, when we were also protesting, when we were also on the street. But that was not ideologically driven, that emergency. There was a big difference. And therefore, for the last 10 years, every time there's a visit by the Prime Minister to this state, the land of Periyar and Annadurai, and salam to those great thinkers and great philosophers and great practitioners. Go back, Modi is what trends on social media. And that is the resistance there is in this land. And therefore, I think when Mr. Rahul Gandhi said, and the Congress manifesto reflected what much has been practiced in the state for a long time, finally the North is learning from the South. Friends, is it the end of the show? Is it the end of the show? Is it the end of the road? We hope so. But I think we still need to struggle in the last 4 rounds of the election. And I come here from Maharashtra, where there are another 3 rounds left. And in the country, there are 4 rounds left. Because every effort will be made to tire us out. And I see a lot of friends from the media. I consider you all friends, even if you're from the Godi media, because I am a journalist. So I will not say you're not friends. But when the history of this decade is written, the singular tragedy will be the abdication by the media to allow us to forget. Because if you look at the 10 years of this regime, and I was looking at it in preparation for today, because in 2016 in Madurai at the KG Kannambaran lecture, I wrote a paper saying that this government has declared a war on all sections of its people, So while the disgusting, deplorable, unlawful, unconstitutional speech made in Banswara needs to be prosecuted, and my organization has demanded it like many other people have demanded, I think it is also the most sickening diversionary tactic that is being employed. And we have to recognize it as such. Hate has worked in the past for this ideology. And it's not about one individual. I think that no individual is above the dangerous ideology that the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh represents. It is an ideology which has formulated itself on the horrors of Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's Nazism, but it has actually worked an organization for 99 years, driven and founded on hate, othering, and exclusion. And it is aided in our society and in our country by the existence of a deplorable caste system, which allows and has allowed for centuries exclusion and othering and hatred. That is why, in one sense, the Indian form of fascism is even more dangerous, because it is backed by a societal thousands of years of possible agreement with the kind of fascist arrangement that might come about. And therefore, it's very, very important that we don't lose the opportunity in 2024. Friends, what do we say about unemployment today? What do we tell young people today? My generation who has seen a better time. And whatever it is, whatever people might say, Rajdeep Sardesai or anybody else, it was never such a hopeless time, either in terms of lives or statistics. 65% of our youth unemployed. I mean, how can a government escape that scrutiny when it's going to the election? But it is trying to do that. And the media is helping it do that by not reminding this government about what happened in Bihar in January, what happened in Uttar Pradesh. I'll just remind this very, very learned audience that when angry Bihari youth came out on the road and burnt railway coaches because 1.25 crores of Biharis applied for just 45,000 jobs in the railways. And do we know there are 25 lakh vacancies in the railways? 2,500,000 vacancies which the government is not filling. Because they want to hollow out our public institutions and privatize even transport. And they want to create a frustrated youth that will be willing to be mobs on the street and not be thinking active citizens. What happened in Uttar Pradesh and Lucknow a few months ago, when the application again for the BPSC examination, suddenly the paper leaks. Suddenly the paper leaks. And what are the figures? What are the figures we are told? 48 lakh children, young people, not children, 48 lakh people were going to sit for that exam. Again, the vacancy was just 60,244. And suddenly, just the day before, when they reach their centers, they are told no examination because the paper has leaked. Who is responsible for the leak? Government. 400 rupees into 48 lakhs. They have already paid for the forms. Who is going to answer these questions? Let's talk about hunger. Let's talk about nutrition. Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about the Agniveer scheme. Any way you look at it, any federalism, the attack on the state's autonomy, Tamil Nadu led the battle, Kerala, Karnataka followed, and I would like to salute the leadership of the DMK here when they made that slogan in the election, 28 Paisa Pradhan Mantri. Because that is the real issue in this election. It's not just about a clever slogan. It is also about understanding what the real issue is. The real issue is not about Mughals, Aurangzeb, as Prime Minister said yesterday. And if at all you want to use a symbol like the Mangal Sutra, which is important for many women, for thousands and hundreds of women, then let's talk about the Mangal Sutra when the Notbandi happened. And suddenly the informal sector was destroyed and the ready cash of people was taken away. Or let's talk about it when the COVID pandemic took place, or when hunger took place, or when the oxygen cylinders had to be got in Delhi and Uttar Pradesh and hundreds of thousands of people died because of the COVID pandemic. And as many as 600 of our migrant workers had to walk home because of a shameful decision again by the Modi regime without consulting states about what should be done when this country is faced by something like a pandemic. So you don't believe in cooperative federalism. You do not believe in constructive governance. You do not believe in sharing financial autonomy of the states. You pass the Animal Practices Act to curtail meat eating in the first term, not in the second term. Again, something which you're actually stepping on federal toes because that comes under the state government's purview. There are so many examples that I'll be talking only about what this government has done. And what we need to talk about today is how we need in the next 3.5, 4 weeks to return the discourse to the issues that matter away from the hate speech that is deliberately being perpetrated. Friends, it's not surprising to me that this kind of hate speech was resorted to. The results of the first phase were out. The second phase were no better for the ruling party. And they still feel, and unfortunately our people have responded to hate before. And I think therefore we need to, in the short term, middle term and long term, speak about how we will create electoral population that will not respond to communal rhetoric and hate. That we will not suddenly decide to vote for a government which is inept and incapable of governing simply because an identity is thrown at us and a stigma and a slur is put against our minorities. Friends, 200,000 Indians have illegally migrated to the United States in the last 5 years. Illegal migration. 7 lakh Indians have gone because they can't bear to stay in this country anymore. And what are they talking about? What are we speaking about? We are losing our talent. We are losing educated young people because they feel this is not a climate where they want their young children to grow up in. And it is not just Muslims who are migrating. Look at the figures. It is also the majority community that is migrating. They don't want to get into any complications. They don't want to resist. They don't want to protest. They don't want to fight, but they want to have a better future, so they have gone. Friends, 2014, this government was voted to power. Remember that election campaign of the Prime Minister-elect. It also was peppered with hate speech like Ghuspetia and all the rest. It's not something new at all for this person. Remember the first election speech he made in September 2002 after the state-sponsored carnage. In Becharji, Mehsana district, he called relief camps baby-making factories. So it's a long history, because if an ideology believes that this kind of hatred can work, then it shows the weakness in our people and it shows the weakness in our democracy. And that is a challenge for progressive forces like us. Within 2 weeks of the Prime Minister Modi being sworn in 2014, in my state, in the city of Pune, Mohsin Sheikh was lynched and killed. Thereafter it was Akhlaq, then it was Junaid, then it was Tabriz, then it was Pehlu Khan. And the list is long. But we are not given the time to grieve. We are not given the time to hang our heads in shame because the media is allowing our people to forget. In 2016, a historic movement broke out from the streets of Gujarat. I don't know how many of us remember it, the Una movement. Because there was a public trashing of those young Dalit professionals who, for their profession, they simply use the cow's carcass for their living. And it's an age-old practice. But no, because of the kind of sanction given by this regime, they were trashed. And a young leadership emerged in Gujarat, Dalit leadership, to challenge it. And for me, one of the most important things in that movement from July to August that led to the resignation of the Chief Minister at that time, Anandiben Patel, was the fact that this movement of Dalits in Gujarat reached out to the Muslims in Naroda Patia. I found that unbelievable that I'll see it in my lifetime. That Naroda Patia was the worst massacre of 2002. When in broad daylight, 124 persons were not just killed brutally, but it was the scene of daylight gang rape as well. And what this movement did was, through dialogue and through engagement with the local populations, they actually carried out a procession of about 300, 400 Dalits through Naroda Patia, saying, we are sorry for what happened in 2002. It was unbelievable. But that is the kind of politics we need. That is the kind of mobilization we need. And that is the kind of mobilization that will give life to the words of the analysis that we've heard, that what we are seeing in the manifestation of an RSS government is actually a counter-revolution. We need to get our people aware of their identities, but out of their identities to be able to identify across issues and across identities and see because Dalits and tribals and Adivasis were misused in 2002 to, to carry out violence. It has been documented. And I'll also say that when bail was given very quickly to some of the leaders, those who were from the depressed castes were not given bail till the trial ended. So by then the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and everybody had abandoned them. So it's a very devious thing the way communal violence works in this country and communal hatred works in this country. And therefore I think, coming back to the subject today, how can we, through all our ability, through social media and contacts, energize the campaign in the other states to ensure that real issues become, that the fatigue that seems to have affected some section of the electorate, and I also believe that it's not necessarily the opposition electorate, it's probably the BJP supporters, but still we cannot risk that there'll be a fatigue in the next 5 rounds of elections. And therefore, what can we do to sustain all these issues? It's very, very important. I just want to give one more example about the consequences of unemployment. The Minister of State for Home, Nityanand Rai, told Parliament that 9,140 youngsters had committed suicide because of not getting jobs. Should that not be an election issue? The face and the story of Vikas Singh, who hung himself and wrote this letter saying, I'm doing it because I just can't get a job and I can't sustain my family. How many of us remember 2016, January 17th, Hyderabad Central University? Rohit Vemula takes his life. Institutional murder. But it's not just the tragedy of a young, bright life going, but the fact that 2 central ministers had a hand in ensuring that he was so despairing that the life got taken. Because they launched a tirade against the Ambedkarite circle in HCU. One was the Labour Minister and one was Smriti Irani. And I think these are the names that we need to call out. Because it's never happened in our country before that directly a union government, a central government minister takes so much interest in decimating an Ambedkarite study circle because they find Ambedkarites a threat to their politics, where they can co-opt Dalits instead. And thereafter, what happens in GNU? I remember I had gone to GNU to address a meeting on Rohit Vemula just before the GNU agitation broke out. It was first HCU, then it was GNU. And then we know the efforts made to demonize the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And why was Jawaharlal Nehru University demonized? I think we need to ask ourselves that question. And left forces will understand that the Central University as a concept was created in Nehruvian India, thanks to the influence of states like Tamil Nadu and otherwise, because the realization was that unless you create a university which is an institute of excellence but which encourages diversity and ensures affirmative action so that people from Begusarai, a Kanhaiya Kumar, and an Umar Khalid from Jamia Nagar, Delhi, can come and become PhD students. And they were demonized. Umar Khalid is still in jail. So I think we have to understand the kind of steps forward this country has made with all its limitations before 2014. And the creation of the Central University was one of them. And even there, after the JNU agitation broke out, I sat with many of the union leaders and to understand that how did this thing like Delhi University, HCU, JNU emerge. And it's a fascinating thing. It actually calls for a book. Initially, after the creation of the Central University in the 1960s, there was not so much diversity. It was still very upper class, very elite. But it was the left unions that struggled. And they took on the faculty, like Bipin Chandra, Romila Thapar and others, and said, listen, we have to give admission to diverse students. Because if we do not, we will not get that quality of diversity. So it was a struggle. And that's the struggle of any thinking, growing democracy. Nothing comes on a platter. So I think up to 2014, we were an evolving democracy with one glitch during the emergency. But what has happened after 2014 is a complete regression. And I think the word is a good word, counter-revolution, because we have seen a complete regression at every level. And therefore, hate speech. And remember, there's a history, because I teach the historiography of communal violence. People identify me with the Gujarat massacre, but my work with communal violence started with my city, 92, 93 Bombay. And then I started looking at the Judicial Commission reports. I started looking at this whole demon of communalism. Because let's not forget, this country was partitioned. This country was partitioned, and it was a brutal partition. And if you look at the map of India, east to west, then you know that there was a Bengal where one community suffered. There was a Punjab where another community suffered. And there was Bihar where a third community suffered. And all three communities suffered equally. Lives were lost brutally. Properties were lost. There was massive displacement. And there was no explanation for how neighborhoods turned against each other in such hatred. That is communalism. That is the very venomous power of this kind of politics, which uses religion and identity for political ends. So, post-independence, when one country was created in the name of religion, when this country and its Constituent Assembly chose a wise, sagacious, and practical decision to remain a secular democratic republic, it was a very, very wise decision, because there's no way you could have kept such a diverse people together. At least the dream of equality, at least the dream of non-discrimination, at least the dream of equality before the law and justice. But if that dream also is snatched away, like this regime has snatched away, then you are in for anarchy, chaos, and worse. And therefore, it's very, very important that we understand and explain this ideology that is governing this regime. I keep saying whenever I speak, it's not about one or two individuals. The venomous superstructure and base structure of the RSS ideology itself generates these kind of individuals. Some are more effective than others. And the Indian brand of fascism will be a conglomerate between the far socio-religious Brahminical right and the far economic crony capitalist right. And I agree with Comrade here that at least he's made that clarity in our heads. Because I remember in the 1990s and 80s, we were struggling. We could see it empirically. Empirically, we could see it. We saw it in Orissa. We saw it in Gujarat, even before 2002. We saw it in parts of Maharashtra. That there is a connection between the onset of neoliberal reforms, quote unquote, they're not reforms, but neoliberalism, and this upsurge in this majoritarian politics. But we were not able to clinch that theory. We were not able to understand it completely. This regime has completely made that clarity possible. The hollowing out of all our public institutions, the hollowing out of all our public sector units, the handing over of health, education, and other sectors to private capital, and to one section or two sections of private capital. Sainath's name was mentioned. I remember doing an interview with him in 2014 about the quality of Indian parliament, because parliament itself has been used in the last 10 years to dismantle the constitution brick by brick, by weaponization of laws, by passing of laws like UAPA was passed, by the way, by UPA. And that's the other thing we need to remember as we go ahead and praise the Congress manifesto as we are doing, that you promised after Gujarat that you'll repeal POTA, but within 2 years in 2006, you bring in UAPA. And at that point, the only parties that had opposed it were the left and I think the DMK in parliament. That you cannot have a permanent counter-terror law. And that was after 2014, that section was brought in where you said even an individual can be dubbed a terrorist. And the weaponization of laws, PMLA, UAPA. I work with Adivasis too, my friends. I'm the All India Union of Forest Working People. And the Forest Rights Act that was brought in 2006 was a result of Adivasi struggle, forest workers' struggle all over the country. And this government has done everything to completely dilute that law. By the amendment to the Forest Conservation Act, by the Mining Amendment Act, by the Highways Act, multiple other laws have been, because they can't touch this law. Because if they touch this law like the Scheduled Caste Atrocities Act, there'll be an uproar. So instead, they try and get in other laws that will completely paralyze the functioning of this law. So the parliament, coming back to parliament, what is the structure of Indian parliament today? The presence of billionaires in parliament is something we need to note. The 2014 parliament had 83% of people who were crorepati's. 2009 also had them, which were 48%. So if you have a situation where these crorepati's in 2014 are also owners of television companies, mobile companies, and mining companies. So the strangulation of democracy is complete, because it's unlikely then that the television channels at News Hour will discuss unemployment or hunger or proportional representation. It's much easier for them to speak about land jihad, madrasa jihad, love jihad, fertilizer jihad. It's shameful. It's shameful the way the corporatized electronic media has contributed to the hate that is today being legitimized by the political leadership. It's a real shame. My organization, Citizens for Justice and Peace, yes, we are proud of our work in Gujarat, but we've been working on a hate monitor program, and we are filing 5 complaints every month to the National Broadcasting Digital Statutory Authority that is supposed to monitor hate speech on television. We get the orders, favorable orders, but it takes 3 years, and by that time the viewership has gone into 10 lakhs. We are working on the citizenship question in Assam. And I'm going to come to the CAA. If we are talking about the weaponization of the law, there could be nothing more dangerous than the Citizenship Amendment Act that has been passed in 2019. I say that not only because it brings in religion as a marker, though that is important enough, because using religion as a marker excludes one section of the people from 3 countries and gives accelerated citizenship to 6 communities from there. But I'm not going to talk about the CA. I could talk for 2 hours on that, but it basically does not meet the test of either reasonableness or this under the Constitution, and it is under challenge. But the Supreme Court has not heard the matter now for 5 years. What is the implication of documented citizenship? I want to share an example because we've been working for 7 years now in Assam. We have a very young team over there, a vibrant team, 3,000 volunteers, and at least 30 full-timers who are working in 19 of Assam's 25 districts. And our experience has told us that once you start the test of documented citizenship, meaning if you don't produce these 9 or 14 documents, you're declared un-Indian, non-Indian. Nowhere in the world is there a test of documented citizenship. 19 lakh people have been excluded from the NRC. 27 lakh people in Assam have not been given Aadhaar cards. Aadhaar has nothing to do with citizenship. But by not giving them Aadhaar cards, they can't open bank accounts, they can't put their children in schools, they can't access government schemes. The government of Assam has spent 1,700 crores on a bad implementation of the NRC. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court of India has also had something to do with the way it has been encouraged. So what bothers me is that today there are 22 lakh people in Assam, 19 lakh from the NRC, 22 in the D voters, and 22 declared foreigners. And we are helping them in a foreigner tribunal. Last year, we managed to get 25 people declared Indian. We are one small organization. What happens if suddenly this government comes back to power and decides to send all those who are facing cases to detention camps? And what will these detention camps be used for? What if an all India NPR and NRC is declared as was threatened by the Home Minister when CAA was first filed? Remember his chronology speech. So, friends, there's a real danger that this government, if it comes back to power, we will not see democracy as we know it. And that there'll be further weaponization of the law. And you'll have a whole section of our people who will be rendered non-citizens and probably be used for crony capital. That's my only worst case scenario I can see, because what will you do with so many people? And please understand, and I tell this to my non-Muslim friends, that once the test of documented citizenship begins, it's not just Muslims who will be the target. It'll be working class people, farmers, agricultural laborers, fish workers, migrant workers, Dalits, Adivasis, all sorts of segments. This is our experience in Assam. So I think we need to be very, very clear about the threats of this regime. I don't think I need to tell this audience about it. But how do we ensure that in the next 5 phases of the election that are left, it actually is the end of the show for this government? That is the real challenge. Friends, I want to come back a little bit to hate speech, because I mentioned partition and I mentioned post-partition, the choice India made. And then we've had bouts of communal violence. Jabalpur was the first, then we had Ranchi, then we had other small incidents. And then in the 1980s, suddenly, you see the face of the Indian state changing, in the sense you have seen a communal behavior manifest from the police force suddenly. When you see Aligarh, the violence, Muradabad, then you see Bhagalpur, then you see Meerut, Hashimpura, then you see 1969, Gujarat was also very bad, when you had a lot of targeting and biased behavior. So the legacy of partition has been that this festering non-resolution of quote unquote resentment towards Muslims has not been dealt with in a societal way. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's a challenge for all of us who are people's organizations and all, that we have to have a secularization of society. We have to have a dialogue about the conflict that has happened. Partition was something huge. We need to talk about it so that this festering hatred is removed. Every single bout of communal violence or pogrom has been preceded by hate speech. And that is why we fear when we hear this kind of orchestration of hate speech again and again and again, especially by somebody who's the Prime Minister, that it actually is a precursor to some violence that might take place against our minorities. And unfortunately, in the past, there's also been this situation, not now, not under this regime, but where minority communalism has fed into majority communalism. So it's a challenge for all of us that minority communalism, whenever it raises its head, we have to speak against that also, by constantly saying it does not have the same threat as majority communalism, because it cannot change the structure and the nature of the state. But because ordinary people can go towards the right, if they see minority communalism, we have to also, on principle, stand against minority communalism. So it's complicated. It's difficult. It's a nuanced battle. And it's a battle that really needs to be fought at the level of society, mass organizations, and political organizations. Political organizations and political parties cannot ignore the communalism in our midst. The political parties need to deal with it in their cadres also. Because then the ideology will be strong, then the ideology will be the same, then it will not be possible for hate speech to affect it. My team and I were, day before yesterday, looking at, after this horrible speech on the 21st of April, we were looking at the last 10 years when it comes to hate speech. And you realize that our public discourse has been contaminated. I hope in Tamil Nadu you've been free of it, but I believe it's not the case. Even here it's become very bad, because you have some very questionable leaders in the local BJP as well who are kind of constantly using this kind of speech. But I mean, what do we speak about? Do we speak about Sadhvi Pragya? Do we speak about Giriraj Singh? Do we speak about Prime Minister Modi and Shah? Do we speak about Yati Narasimhanand, who in Hinduism's holy city of Haridwar in December 2021 makes a speech virtually calling for the genocide of the Muslim community? And it takes 5 petitioners to go to the Supreme Court to even get an FIR registered, and he's still out there making that speeches occasionally. Then you have that Raja Singh from Goshamal, Telangana, who also makes constantly abusive and unlawful speeches. And he's constantly being taken all over the country by his organization. My state of Maharashtra, particularly because it's politically volatile, has since the last change of government in June 2022 seen hate speeches every week. Because for the right, for the RSS-driven Bharatiya Janata Party, they see hate speeches by fraternal organizations as a method of political non-mobilization, because they want people not to think about any other issues. And the police does not act. The courts do not act suo motu. It takes citizens to constantly complain and go to the thing. So how do we collectively resist this demon is the question we need to ask. Yeah, we are filing cases. Yeah, we are filing complaints. But we need to work also at a societal level, in communities, in bastis, in buildings, in towers, and constantly say, listen, this is what the hate is doing to us. We need to have a mass detoxification campaign, which has to be a political campaign, which has to go hand in hand with a campaign on the constitutional rights for all and welfare and social justice for all. And it has to revitalize our historical symbols, the symbols of resistance and protest. What is missing in our midst is this mass contact intellectual cultural program. And I think that is what is making us vulnerable to sway with hate speech. I mean, I couldn't believe, I don't know if you even remember, New Year's Day of 2022, that horrible Sulli Deals app comes out, where Muslim women who are young, professional, doing very well, are suddenly finding themselves in an abusive position online. And this is the level to which this government has reduced our society. This regime has reduced our society. That you constantly use this demonizing of one community. And again, my fellow speaker is right, that their books tell us this. You read We Our Nationhood Defined, you read Bunch of Thoughts, and they say Muslims, Christians, and communists are our internal enemies of the perceived Hindu nation, which I hope never comes into existence. They also say that we need to overthrow the constitution. The RSS never flew the national flag till 2000 in its office in Delhi. And I really believe that it is the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh that we should be calling out. And it is that organization that is responsible for spawning leaders like this who make such hate speeches. I cannot forget the damage done by L.K. Advani. Today we remember this man because he's reached a pinnacle of hate. But I remember the man who brought hatred into our living rooms. That was through the Rath Yatra, which was a bloody Rath Yatra, which was taken from Rajkot, Somnath Mandir, Gujarat, and all over the country and ended up in the demolition of the Babri Masjid. That campaign was not a campaign for the building of any temple, because no temple, my mother was a believing Hindu, her name was Sita. And she wrote 300 letters by hand, 7th December to 12th December, to every Muslim she knew, saying she was ashamed of what had happened on 6th of December, 1992. It was a campaign to not just demolish a mosque, which happened, but it was to signal the arrival of the Hindu Rashtra. The same signal that was given on 30th of January, 1948, when Gandhi was killed. We might like Gandhi, we might critique him. That's not the issue. But the point is, he was a threat to this ideology. And he was a threat to this ideology because he was a man from amongst their midst who spoke about Hindu-Muslim harmony and who also spoke in his own way against untouchability. We may not like it, I critique it, but he spoke against it. So like my young friend was telling me, I spoke this time by video on the 30th of January this year to a group in Tamil Nadu, because I brought out this book called Beyond Doubt on the Killing of Gandhi. Because I learned from my mentor in journalism, Jagan Fadnavis, that there were 5 attempts on Gandhi's life before the one that killed him. And this whole bogus theory that the RSS puts out and Brahmanical forces put out that it is because of the creation of Pakistan. No. First was in 1934 when there was no call for Pakistan. It was because he spoke for a law against untouchability and because he said that if this nation has to be together, it has to be Hindus and Muslims together. So that is something that these forces could not stomach. And in the 5 attempts before the one that took his life, Godse was involved in 3 of them. So it was a definite pre-planned conspiracy. And I lost a very close friend to this ideology that generates this hate. 5th of September 2017, my friend Gauri Lankesh was killed in cold blood. And before that, it was Kalburgi sir. And before that, it was Pansare sir. And before that, it was Narendra Dabolkar sir. All rationalist radicals, all of them. Only one of the killings, Narendra Dabolkar, was before 2014. Otherwise, all happened under this regime. And why were these individuals a threat? They were a threat because they stood out and spoke truth to power and called out the politics of regressive counter-revolution that we are talking about. Gauri said that I'm a Lingayat and I'm not a Hindu. She said that. Kalburgi, I don't know how many of you know, but M.M. Kalburgi sir is responsible for the most amazing work of translating 20,000 vachanas of Basava, which is old Kannada, into modern day Kannada. And now those vachanas are available in 15 world languages, including English. And why are vachanas a threat? Because vachanas, like so much of our rich resistance movement and literature, speaks against caste, speaks against discrimination, and actually valorizes work and says that any caste system that does not respect work with the hands is no system at all. And therefore, they can't stomach Basava, they can't stomach Kabir, they can't stomach Narayan Guru, they can't stomach Shahu Maharaj, they can't stomach Tukaram, they can't stomach Shivaji, but they will co-opt Shivaji. They will co-opt Shivaji. And I know there's a speech given by the veteran trade union leader S.A. Dange outside Calico Mills in Bombay, not Mumbai then, Bombay, 1951, where he says, Tyanche Shivaji, Amche Shivaji. Means, their Shivaji, our Shivaji. Let's remember the real Shivaji. So the poison has been happening for a long time. The anti-cow slaughter movement, Arya Samaj movement, and the counter-mobilization among the Muslim radicals also we have to criticize and call out. So I think these two communalisms have fed into each other and resulted in partition. And we are left now with a society that is not reading enough, not informed enough, and political parties that are not leading intellectual movements to educate the people through culture, politics, and history. And that is the need of the hour. Let's not forget that this man who became Prime Minister in May 2014 went to that temple in Kathmandu and did a Rudra Abhishek at state cost, where sandalwood and ghee was bought for 2-3 crore rupees. I mean, so in one sense, this regime has tried to signal that it is already a Hindu Rashtra in so many ways. But I believe that this country and our people are resisting. The last 10 years, we've seen many, many struggles. We've seen many struggles. Adivasis have resisted, workers have resisted, and let's not forget the historic anti-CAA movement, which began in Shaheen Bagh. I say salam to Shaheen Bagh and the women of Shaheen Bagh. The state might have crippled that movement, but the legacy remains, and young people are still in jail suffering for it. And then the farmers' movement. The farmers' movement that actually brought the government to its knees. So it's not that there has been no resistance, there has been resistance. But again, when I first entered journalism in 1983, as a journalist, I'm talking again to you all with my hands pleated, we would give coverage to protests. We would constantly cover nationwide protests so that people got to know about them. People got informed about them. We would follow up stories. Today, there is no space in the media for this kind of resistance stories. And all governments are trying to quell protests. I hope that's not the case in Tamil Nadu, but I think many governments are doing it. Even in a state like America, for the last 3 months or more, universities, including top universities, are demonstrating against Palestine. And Canada, the students have joined in by naming their hostels after Palestinian names. And Australian students have joined. And young people in in America have actually expressed their opinion against what their government is doing by sending arms to Palestine. So there is a change all over the world, a world that went right-wing. There is a change and a resistance. And I'm hoping that this election 2024 will signal a setback to the forces of Indian proto-fascism or neo-fascism. I can't be sure yet. I can't be sure just yet, but I'm hoping that it can happen. Tamil Nadu has certainly shown us the way. And I mean that. I mean that not only because I'm here, I say it all the time, that the manner in which the campaign was held, even the Godi media was forced to cover and say that, Tamil Nadu, there doesn't look like any wave. And when the anchors in Godi media start saying that, then you say, kuch to ho raha hai. Kuch to ho raha hai. That actually it's happening. And I think there is a slight change in the way Godi media is reporting things. So let's hope that this change is actually a change that will result in a difference on June 4th, 2024. We are all part of movements and we all live on hope and we all live on resistance. And very close friends in Karnataka had got together in this fantastic movement before the Karnataka elections last year and managed to help push the Congress government to come to power. And I use those words because I've been saying for the last 10 years that our youth were the opposition, our farmers have been the opposition, our Adivasis have been the opposition, our workers have been the opposition, but somehow the political opposition has not taken up the mantle as quickly as it should have nationally. So, not taking any chances, friends in Karnataka, people's movements in Karnataka got together and did it. After that, everywhere in the country, people got enthused. Not everyone is as lucky as Tamil Nadu, so everyone had to do it. So in Maharashtra, my state, many formations emerged, apart from Bharat Jodo Abhiyan, which is one formation. There was Lok Morcha, there is Nirdhar Maharashtra. There were 5 or 6 formations that emerged from the movements, basically to mobilize people to vote. Now, this is very strange kind of work for us because we've never done this kind of work before. We've politically mobilized, we've socially mobilized, we've mobilized around issues, but we've not really done electoral kind of work. So it meant a lot of understanding, this, that, but it has happened. Through this whole process, one of our concerns was in Maharashtra that the Dalit movement, the Republican Party movement, is very, very fractured, and that means sometimes division of votes. Muslim community also sometimes candidates come up and there's a divided vote. AIMM comes, etc. Muslim community, we didn't have to worry too much because the Muslim community across the country has silently made up its mind this time to do tactical voting. But we were concerned about the Dalit community, very concerned. I'm very, very happy to tell you that last Monday, I was telling them to my friend when we were coming from the airport, that last Monday, 22nd of April, those senior Dalit leaders, Shyamdada Gaikwad and others, Wagmare ji, who had formed the Panthers in the 1970, they came together, about 60, 65 of them, had a 5-hour intensive conclave And they announced the formation of dissolving all their local outfits and forming the Progressive Republican Alliance Stroke Party. And they said that we will go across Maharashtra and ensure that the votes go to the India Alliance. And we appeal to other Ambedkarite organizations, and you know whom I'm referring to, I don't have to say it, to not divide the vote. Do not divide the vote. So I think there is a realization that if we do not do this at this point, then there's a real danger to each one of us and each one of our movements. Since 2014, I've been saying from Gram Panchayat, Zilla Parishad, Assembly to Parliament, this force cannot be in any seat anywhere. Because this is not a normal political party. This is not the kind of political party that you can have a dialogue with. This is a party that intrinsically exists to overthrow the constitution, that intrinsically exists to overthrow democracy. And it's so dangerous, you just have to read D.R. Goyal, you have to read Devanur Mahadevan, you have to read Purushottam Agarwal, who have been in the RSS in their youth and who've come out and told us that it is, I don't know how to express. Look at Tamas. I urge young people to watch Tamas. It was a serial made by Govind Nihalani in the 80s. Finally telecast by Doordarshan after much struggle at 10 p.m. in the night so nobody could see it. And it is a frightening depiction of what RSS Shakha does to a human being. Because I'll come back to the subject of today, which is hate speech. Hate is not a normal condition. Hate is not a normal human condition. We might get angry with each other. We might get upset with each other. I might hurt somebody I love very much because I'm a human being. But hating somebody, pathologically hating somebody, and being brought up from age 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to hate is not a natural human condition. And therefore this perversion of psychology, physical human beings and relationships is what this ideology represents. And therefore it has a potential, and it has done that damage. In many, many parts of the country, that damage has been done. So even if we succeed on June 4th, a lot of work remains to be done to detoxify the entire environment. I mean, families have been broken, friendships have been broken, communities have been broken. The WhatsApp university, I mean, I don't have to tell you this. So the damage is very, very deep because this hatred has been sanctioned from the very top. But the process for it began in the 80s, like I said, when you actually witnessed pogroms, when you saw police officers behaving differently, when you saw educational syllabuses change, because you realize that fascism does not come in one fell sweep. Fascism comes by slow infiltration into institutions of governance. So your police officers, so your teachers, so your lawyers, so your judges actually believe in the ideology which is not the constitution. And hence it's a huge, huge task ahead of us. I believe we are up to it. I believe there is enough in India, enough on the soil, because let's not forget the history of this country for 3,000 years. It's not just independence and the freedom struggle we are talking about. The Shraman and the Brahman has been fighting for the last thousands of years. And the fight against caste, inequality, gender has been age-old in this country. Not always successful, but the resistance has been there. So let's see if we can reignite some of that. Finally, as a woman, I want to speak about gender. What have the last 10 years meant for women? You know, the communal violence, particularly post 1991-92, had a peculiar characteristic of targeting the minority community women in a very debasing way. I mentioned the Suli deals, Suli app and all that, which is the worst manifestation of it, but the physical gang rape and murder and cauterization we saw in Gujarat. We saw in Manipur, which I have not mentioned at all, and I want to mention it. That what does hatred do and what does an abdication of a government do is visible in Manipur. 3rd May, I urge people in Tamil Nadu to have a large meetings all over the state to signify 1 year of a complete abdication of the union government and the state government. Even today, Kukizos and Mamaites can't talk to each other. because the state is festering this division. And the state government and the central government are together in not allowing any rapprochement to take place. And it took that video on July 19th last year, that video where Kuki women were being abused, for finally even the Supreme Court to wake up. So this characteristic of identity-based violence, which even partition saw, you had terrible accounts in partition as well of all community women being brutally targeted. We saw that in Gujarat in a big way. And let's not forget that this ideology that venerates the Manusmriti actually has a very low opinion of thinking, speaking women. Let's never forget what happened in Hathras. And what happened to Siddiq Kapan because of Hathras. A journalist in Delhi who just goes to cover it and he has to be in jail for 2 years because he was covering it because he happens to be born a Muslim. But Hathras is this young 17-year-old Dalit woman who's brutalized in her village. And after that, her family is not even given her body for the last rites. And neither the Yogi government nor the Modi government is held accountable. In Banaras Hindu University, which is the Prime Minister's constituency, in the university there have been cases of sexual abuse and rape. And there's no national outrage, no debates on television, no debates on news hour. We had our wrestlers, our women wrestlers. We're very proud of being a Vishwaguru G20 nation. But we had our wrestlers, our women, through the cold of Delhi, January, February, protesting. And the government did not speak to them. Worse, they brutally broke up their protest one day because they wanted preparations for some tamasha of theirs. So this is a government that does not listen to its women, its people, its Adivasis, its minorities, its farmers, its workers, its intellectuals, its dissenters, and it's a government, regime rather, that wants a opposition Mukt Bharat. What can be more dangerous than that? What can be more dangerous than that? This kind of cynical play of extreme right-wing politics is our brand, typical brand of Indian fascism. I hope I've not overstepped my time. It's always a pleasure to speak in Tamil Nadu and I always get carried away. Thank you very, very much.
வாழும் வரலாற்று அறிஞர் கருணானந்தன் அவர்களின் பாசிசமே பார்ப்பனியம், பார்ப்பனியத்தின் பாசிச கூறுகளை வரலாற்று ஆதாரங்களோடு எடுத்துச் சொல்லும் அற்புதமான நூல். விலை ₹200 மட்டும். புத்தகம் வாங்க திரையில் தெரியும் தொலைபேசி எண்களுக்கு தொடர்பு கொள்ளுங்கள் அல்லது கருஞ்சட்டை பதிப்பகத்தின் இணையதளத்துக்கு வாருங்கள்.